Hello everyone, and welcome back to this tutorial series on how to learn the basics of Blender. I hope it has helped you so far, and in this tutorial we're going to be learning how to add color to our object and also how to add different materials such as glass. Before we get started, we need to do one thing. If you click on the cube, right click on it, and then go up here to your properties panel and click on material, you will see that this panel shows up, and this is where we would normally add color and textures to our object. The thing is that this way of adding materials to your object is used with an old render engine called the Blender renderer. Now, this way of rendering your image or making it into the final product is very outdated, and it doesn't give very realistic results. The shadows are very dark sometimes, and it's hard to get more realism with this kind of rendering engine. So with this so outdated, they decided to make a new render engine called Cycles. If you go up here and click on Blender Render, and you will see these options, and click on Cycles Render, you will see that the materials properties changes. Now that we've changed the renderer to cycles, all we need to do is, with the cube selected, click on Use Nodes. If you do not have a material slot, all you have to do is click on New. Now, the first thing right here is the name of the material, so let's go ahead and change that. Just left click on it and type in cube underscore color. It's very important in Blender or any 3D program to name all your materials and all your objects or anything that you can name, because once you have a lot of them, you don't know what is what anymore, and you get overwhelmed with all these names with different numbers on them and nothing corresponds to anything. So when you can, make sure to name everything. It will help a lot to keep track of all the things that you make. To change the name of the cube, all you have to do is hit N, and down here under Item you can see the name of the cube. Or you could go over here to the object properties and change it from here. Back to the material property, we're going to change the color of the cube. To change the color, just click on the white here and you're given a color wheel. Left click and drag to change the color, and mouse wheel up or down to change the darkness or brightness of that color, or left click and drag. So let's change this to a nice green color, and you can see that in the 3D space the color of the cube is still the same. Now the reason for that is if I close displacement and open up settings, you can see the viewport color is still white. This color right here, the green color, is the color that will be shown when you render your image into a final product. If I hit 0 on my numpad to go into camera view and hit F12 on my keyboard, you will see that the cube is rendered and it has the green color applied to it. Now when you render something, it basically takes the things you have in your 3D space and it applies the color, the shadows, the light, all of the stuff that's not visible in the 3D space into a finished product. Now once you hit F12 and you're in this view, to go back into the 3D view, all you have to do is click here and select 3D view, or hit the F11 key to toggle between the UV image editor, which is what this is in, and the 3D view. Now, even though it still renders in green when you render the final image with F12, it's important to have everything in your 3D space correspond to what it will be when it's rendered, or else everything will just be a white color and it gets a little confusing. So to get the color in the 3D viewport the same color as when it's rendered into a final image, all you have to do is click on Viewport Color, and when you change this color you will see that the color in the viewport changes. Now, to get the same color as when it's going to be rendered, just hover your mouse over this color and hit Control C, and then with your mouse over here, Control V to copy and paste the color. Now, if you go back here and change the viewport color to something like red, keep in mind that if you hit F12, the color of the cube will still be green because the viewport color does not affect how the cube will look in the final image. So the best thing to do is to just give it the same color as this one so that you have an idea of what it will look when it's rendered. Now if I hit F11 to go back to the rendered image, you will see that this is a good way of seeing how your final product will be. The only problem is that it's just a still image. There's no way of looking on the other sides of your cube, and if you want to change the color of your cube, for example, hit F11 to go back into the 3D space and change the color to something like red, and I'm going to copy it into the viewport color. Then you have to hit F12 again to get a new image of what it will look like now. Now this is a way of doing it, but sometimes if you have simple scenes or any scenes, it's a little bit annoying to have to go and switch the color and then render it all over again. So an easy way of doing this is if you go back to 3D view, click on here and change it from solid to rendered. Now, just like when you hit F12, your cube is rendered into the final product, except now you can move, rotate, and zoom into your cube just like before and see exactly what it will look like at any angle. You can change the color of your cube directly from here and it will update automatically. And you can see that every time I rotate or move, the image becomes very noisy and then it slowly clears and gets better. If you look up here, you can see samples 8 out of 10. So the samples slowly goes up and it makes the image clearer. Once it reaches 10, it means it's as clear as it will get based on the settings of that. You can make it more to have it even clearer, but I'll go over that in another tutorial. So here you can do anything that you do in the 3D view in object mode. You can scale it, you can rotate it, you can basically edit it and see how it will look as the final product at any time you want. To go back into solid view, just hit Z on your keyboard twice. Now that you know how to add a color to the cube, I'm going to show you how to add multiple colors. Before we do that, I'm quickly going to make the render color right here the same as the viewport color by Control C and Control V to copy and paste. Now coming up here to this plus sign, I'm going to go ahead and click that, and you can see that it adds a new material slot. I'm going to click New, and it gives us the same options as the one before. I'm going to rename this to cube underscore color 2 and hit enter, and I'm also going to change the color to a green and copy it into the viewport. Now to add green to different faces of the cube, all we have to do is hit tab to go into edit mode and then Control tab and go into face selection mode. If I select any of these blue faces, you can see over here on the right that they are assigned to cube color, which is the blue color. If I want to assign them to the green color, all I have to do is select a face by right-clicking on it, go to cube color, and click assign, and you will see that the face is now green. I can do this with multiple faces by shift right-clicking, going to cube color 2 and assign. If I deselect everything by hitting A, and then come over here to the second option that's right here. You can see that if I hit select, it will select all of the faces that are assigned to cube color 2. Now if you want to switch these back to a blue color, it's the same thing. You just select one of the green faces, go to cube color, and click assign. And same thing with this one. If you go to cube color and click select, it will select all of the faces that are assigned to that color. And the third one is deselect, which does as it says, it deselects the faces. You can add as many colors as you want by just hitting the plus sign right here and then clicking new and changing the color as you would like. The last thing I'm going to teach you before we end off this tutorial is the different kinds of shaders. If you go here under the materials panel, under surface, you can see that we're on a shader called diffuse. Clicking on it brings up a list of different shaders such as glossy, glass, translucent, and transparent, and some other ones. I'm going to go over most of these. Before I do that though, I want to set up the 3D scenes so that we could see them a little bit better, because right now it's going to be hard to notice exactly what it does, so let's do that. Hit G and Z to bring the cube up above the grid floor, and then hit Shift A and add a mesh plane. Scale it up with the S key and bring that up also. Now in top view, by hitting 7 on the numpad, put your 3D cursor over here by left clicking and hit Shift A, add mesh, UV sphere. Wherever your 3D cursor is where the new objects will be added, so that's why I positioned it there. Now over here, change the segments to 16, and the rings, leave it at 16. Bring it up out of the floor by hitting G and Z and scale it down, and put it about to the middle of the cube. And over here you could hit smooth to set it smooth. Now go to the materials panel and add a new material. I am not going to name these, but it's always good to name things if you're doing an actual project, but for this tutorial, to save time, I'm not going to bother with the names. I'm going to change the color of this and also the viewport color. Now when I hit Shift D to duplicate it, watch what happens here. Shift D, and you can see that a number 2 appears. This means that this material right here is shared between 2 objects. So if you change the color of one of them, it will change the color on both of them. Now if you don't want that to happen and you want to put a separate color on one of them, all you have to do is select any of them, go here and click the number, and it will make it a single user. Now you could go ahead and change the color without worrying about affecting the other sphere. I'm going to move this one here, and I'm going to make one more, make it a single user by hitting the 2, and change this one to a yellow color. Now if we change the color on this, you see that it only affects this one, but if you would like to put it back to where 2 objects share a material, you could either go here and select one of the other materials, and it will give it that material. Now they both have the purple material. Or if you add a new object, instead of going here to selecting the new material, you could just select this sphere which has no material, shift, right click another one, and then hit Control L and select materials, and it will assign this material to the other one as well. So that's just a quick tip on how to have the same materials or not the same materials on objects. Now what we need to do is, if you either render this or go down here and change it from solid to rendered, You can see that the background is a gray color, which makes us not be able to see our plane that well, since it's also a gray color. What we want to do is go over here to the world properties, click on Use Nodes, and change the color to black. Now, one last thing we need to do, because our scene is a little bit dark, you could either do this in solid mode by hitting Z twice. I'm going to stay in rendered view to show you exactly what's happening. Hit Shift A, add a mesh plane, and this plane is going to act as a light. So hit G and Z, bring it up, and now in the material section add a new one. And I'm going to talk about this one a little bit later, but for now just click on diffuse and change it to emission. Scale it up and hit G and Z and bring it up on the Z axis and just get it out of the way. And now you see that it lights up the scene. And now we are ready to start learning about all these other different materials. One last thing that we need to do is go over here and hit Z twice to go into solid shading. Select the cube and hit X and delete it. If your cursor isn't centered, hit Shift C to recenter it. And now Shift A, add mesh, UV sphere. I'm going to change the segments and the rings to 24. And hit smooth shading up here. Grab it up and scale it, and we are now ready. Going back into rendered shading, I'm going to add a new material to this. When you add a new material, the default shader is the diffuse shader. This one is kind of like a clay substance, and it has no reflection or transparencies to it. It's just a basic color. This is the one that we used on our previous models. The second shader is the glossy shader. This one acts as a shiny or reflective material. Right here, the roughness value determines how reflective it will be. At 0, it's completely reflective and acts as a mirror, and at 1, it has barely any reflection to it. Just like with the diffuse, you can change the color of the glossy, but for now I'm going to leave it to white. The third shader is the glass shader, and this one is used for anything that has a glass material such as windows and glass bottles. I'm going to go into front view by hitting 1 on my numpad, and right here IOR, I'm going to put that to 1. Now the IOR stands for index of refraction. And refraction is the bending of light as the light goes from one substance to another. Like when the light goes from the air into the water or from the air to glass, you will usually see that things past a glass bottle or things that are in the water are kind of warped because the light rays are bending and it's warping the other things in the water or past the glass. So if I put the IOR up, you will see that the purple ball past this sphere is starting to get warped because the bending of the light rays is going up. The roughness right here determines the sharpness of that refraction. At 0, it's very sharp, and at 1, the refraction or the bending of the light is smoothed out. Just like with the other ones, you can change the color of this, and the IOR, when it's at 1, it has no refraction at all, so the roughness at 1 won't affect it at all because the light rays aren't being bent. The next shader is a translucent shader. This shader is kind of like a wax-like substance, and when the light hits it, it goes into the object and scatters inside of it, and then goes through to the other side and illuminates that side. It's kind of like if you hold your finger up to the sun hits one side of your finger, goes into it and scatters around inside and passes through to the other side to illuminate it. The other one is the transparent shader, which is kind of like the glass shader, except it has no refraction at all. If you were to put a color on this, you can see that it's not completely transparent. The only way to get this completely transparent is to put all of these values to 1 to get a completely white color, and you can see that the sphere is transparent now. The next one is the velvet shader. This shader makes the edges of the mesh lighter, and it's also very useful for cloth-like materials. The next shader is the emission shader. This is the same shader that we used for our plane above to light our scene. Now, as the name implies, what this shader does is it makes your object an emitter. So it emits light depending on what the color is here, and also what the strength is right here. Now, a good way to light your scene in Blender is to use planes or other objects if you need, with an emitter shader on them to light it up. The next shader is the mix shader. Now, this shader is very useful and is used a lot because, as the name implies, it can mix two shaders together and combine them and average them out into a new type of material. So right here you're given two shader tabs, and if you click on it, you have all the options as before. So let's select diffuse, and on the second shader tab we'll select glossy. Right here, the FAC value is how much it averages out the two shaders. Right now at 0.5 it's 50% diffuse and 50% glossy. If I change this all the way down to 0, you will see that it's 100% diffuse now, and if I put it to 1, it's 100% glossy. And just like before, you could adjust these values. Like right now it's at 0.2, so the reflectiveness is a little blurry. If I put this down all the way to 0, it's completely reflective. So with this number you can make different kinds of materials instead of just solid glossy materials by changing the FAC value here. You could even make it more complicated by, instead of putting a glossy or a diffuse shader, clicking here and putting another mix shader, which will give you another two shaders to mix, but I won't go into that for now. The last shader I'm going to talk about is the add shader, which is basically the same as the mix shader, except instead of mixing them, it takes the two, adds them together, and makes them stronger and brighter. So that's the rundown on the materials. I'll go over them more in depth probably later in other tutorials. But for now that's it. I hope you could keep up, and I hope you enjoyed it and it helped. I'll see you in the next one.